I'm Mark Zakaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. We're still talking here with Gary Sass, talking about the things that he does is as the director of the Hassenfeld Institute for Public Leadership. We just got done with a very interesting review, compressed but interesting, on public finances. And now the subject that we'd like to talk about is corporate welfare. Gary, would you start by just explaining to our viewers what you mean by the term corporate welfare?
Well, corporate welfare is using tax dollars, you or my tax dollars, for specific businesses. So corporate welfare exists when tax dollars are used to finance preferential tax deals for a company, to give company direct cash subsidies, or loans for a specific business.
And we have a long history of that, of course. Probably one of the more recent is 38 Studios, and there have been some since then. So can you give us a couple of examples, and then let's talk about what can be done about it?
Yeah, well, one example it was A.T. Cross. A.T. Cross recently got almost a $2 million grant from the state because they threatened to move outside the state. What people forget is that A.T. Cross is no longer the iconic company where you have Rhode Islanders sitting at benches making some of the best pens in the world. It's a back office operation. And that's one example. Another example is in the media, in the press this week. There's a group called Urban Smart Growth. They got $3.6 million in tax credits, and there are people who now are pointing out that the person that's behind that was a slumlord. We've given a big tax credit to Homewood Suite Hotels. I think it's a great hotel. I have no reason not to think it's a great hotel, but is that a priority? Why should I be using tax dollars to fund the building of another hotel? The market's important. Market determines these things, and there are a lot of different examples that I could give, but 38 Studios is a good jumping off place to begin this conversation. One of the biggest initiatives that this governor and the General Assembly took was a massive expansion of the corporate welfare agency that gave us 38 Studios. They converted the old Economic Development Commission into Commerce RI. They rebranded it as Commerce RI, and they gave it tremendous monies and powers to exercise corporate welfare. In effect, then they're saying the state should pick winners and losers. Now, in fairness to the state, and I always want to point this out, Rhode Island is not an island. There are other 49 states, so you can't ignore the fact that other states are trying to entice business to invest and come. So you need some of these kinds of instruments, and I would argue, this is a point that others may not agree with, that the corporate welfare we're giving General Electric to come here, it's probably a good investment. The corporate welfare that we're giving a hotel or USG or some of the other things make no economic sense at all. So that has to be put into the right context. But the way we've been exercising and taking corporate welfare, largely through real estate credits, tax increment financing, tax stabilization agreements, went back and I looked, and this is a little bit out of date, but it's the best data I have. For the first 18 months of the existence of Commerce RI, which is really the old EDC on steroids, our policy is we're going to buy economic development, and you're not going to buy it this way because we're not very good, government's not very good at picking winners and losers. But I went back and I looked, and there were 92 projects that were given some kind of grants or loans or tax subsidies in the first 18 months of operation. Almost 60% of that money was to subsidize real estate tax deals. Economic development is not real estate. Economic development is much broader, and that I think should be a cause of concern, because those dollars, and even though some were one-time dollars that came about as refinancing, could have been used to strengthen education. They could have been used to reduce taxes for all of us, to create a better business climate. It's amazing that, and we say Rhode Island in every business climate or tax climate ranking is what I call in the terrible 10. We're in the bottom 10. The latest that came out recently from the Tax Foundation, or Business Tax Climate, had us 44th. It's 44th largely because of how we treat unemployment insurance, and the governor and legislature made some reforms in that this session, so we'll see how that works out. But it's also 44th because we have very high property taxes. And so now we're given crony deals to some real estate developers. Some you and I would probably agree with, others we would disagree with, and we're ignoring the biggest problem that a developer has or a manufacturer has of high property taxes, which mean higher rents and less ability to compete. So I guess it's really a fundamental philosophical issue of what is government's appropriate role. And if it's corporate welfare, you run the risk of cronyism, you run the risk of giving grants and using public money for companies or that or you have it, think politically have an interest in or something. And so that's the cause of concern.
I would, argue that your point about the government picking winners and losers is very well taken and probably should be emphasized. I used to know a scientist who had a sign in his office that said the laws of physics will be strictly enforced, and I have always argued that the laws of economics are also strictly enforced, and you can't by force of will make a winner, because the laws of economics will be strictly enforced. There's probably no documentation, you tell me, on most of these decisions, whether it was a crony deal or not.
Oh, I can tell you about documentation.
Okay.
No, because we study this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in Rhode Island. In the state of New Jersey, Metropolitan got, I think it was Metropolitan, got $200 million of tax credits for moving 3 blocks in Newark. Panasonic got $100 million in tax credits by moving 1 train station. And so politicians, use public money for private investment. And, while you can't be blind to how the world really works, the question here on corporate welfare is, are we overdoing it?
Well, yeah, and I think we are overdoing it, but, okay, Panasonic got a goodie from New Jersey, and Sharp didn't. Is that because somebody on the inside likes one over the other? There may not be real documentation that that's the cause and effect, but you always have that suspicion.
And the suspicion is this: a company is going to expand, invest, and relocate if it makes economic sense for the company. If the market's good, if there's a skilled labor force, those are the things that determine it. And as you do more and more studies, and this was done recently by the New York State Tax Commission, these companies are going to expand anyhow. The tax credit that they get is not a substitute for the market, for what makes economic sense to the company, for the availability of labor. So sometimes we're giving out these tax credits when we really don't have to.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily have the poker face to know or be able to play that game when we don't have to. I think it's our first reflex is to say, here's some money.
Yeah, there's really a basic question, and it's a philosophical question of what is government's proper role in enticing companies to come and expand in the state. And government does have a role to play, but it's not just by real estate deals.
So how can we tighten that up? I mean, is this a thing where if media could shine more light on it and you could know about it beforehand, maybe only the better decisions would get through?
Well, I think the first way to start tightening it up is for the legislature to do their job and have some hearings on this. When the Commerce RI was created, the legislature gave that agency, considerable latitude. They gave them some more latitude in this last session of the legislature. And I think they have to sit back, they have to represent the people's interest and say, what are we getting for the tens of millions of dollars that we're giving out to individual corporations? And without oversight, then you really don't know. And this can be monitored and studied like anything else. There's no will on the part of the administration to do that because this is their baby.
Your comment is telling. If the legislature did its job for the people. Right now, we have to call an end to this segment because the clock is running. We will take time out for one more Are You Kidding Me segment and then be back to conclude things with Gary Sass.